On Sunday, Jesus made his triumphal entry. On Monday, he visited the temple and drove out the merchants. On Tuesday, he was busy with teaching, preaching, and parables. We take up with Jesus as he takes a break and spends time with the disciples. The gospel continues. It was 2 days before the Passover and the festival of unleavened bread. The chief priests and the scribes were looking for a way to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him. For they said, "Not during the festival, for there will be a riot among the people." While he was in Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, as he sat at the table, a woman came with an alabaster jar of very costly ointment of nard, and she broke open the jar and poured the ointment on his head. But some were there who said to one another in anger, "Why was the ointment wasted in this way? For this ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii, and the money given to the poor." And they scolded her. But Jesus said, "Let her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has performed a good service for me. For you always have the poor with you, and you can show kindness to them whenever you wish, but you will not always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for its burial. Truly, I tell you, wherever the good news is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in remembrance of her." Then Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12, went to the chief priests in order to betray him to them. When they heard it, they were greatly pleased and promised to give him money. So he began to look for an opportunity to betray him. Grace to you and peace. Once upon a time, there was a church congregation that was struggling to hang on. Some years, the giving was just barely enough to cover expenses. Other years, it didn't quite make it. The church had a small reserve fund for the tough years, but it was slowly getting smaller. When the pastor of the church retired, the congregation called a new pastor. They got along incredibly well. The pastor loved the congregation, and they loved the pastor. A few months later, a beloved matriarch of the congregation passed away. The congregation voted to use up what was left of the reserve fund to honor that woman. The new pastor protested, "This is reckless. At the very least, if we're going to spend the reserve, let's use it for people in need instead of ourselves." After that day, things were never the same. The relationship between pastor and congregation had been soured. The love seemed to be lost. Who would you side with? The pastor? The congregation? How would you have voted? To save the money? To spend it on the matriarch? To give it to people in need? If you chose one of these options, then you've made the same mistake as Judas. I've always struggled with this story because Judas seems right to me. To spend a year's worth of wages on making Jesus smell pretty, instead of giving it to the poor, seems incredibly wasteful. And when I first read this story, I thought, Judas is absolutely right. I understand his betrayal. And I still do. But where Judas made a mistake, where we all make the same mistake as Judas, was believing that there was one right way, one right answer, one best way, that everything else was worse or wrong. Judas betrayed Jesus because he believed his way was right. And how many times do we do that? How often do we see it happen in our lives, in our nation, and in our world? What Jesus did may not have made financial sense, but it wasn't wrong. The woman's act of sacrifice was a sign of love. Jesus recognized it and honored the love and the sacrifice she showed. It wasn't about the money or what Jesus got out of it. It was about her expression of love that mattered in that moment. My daughter often insists my wife and I don't love her. We don't let her have sweets before bed, or if she hasn't had enough healthy food that day. So she says we don't love her. We insist on her doing her schoolwork, and so she says we don't love her. We try to explain we want you to have a good life, a good future. And that's why some of our rules might not make you happy now, but they exist so that you can have a good life. In her 7-year-old infinite wisdom, she knows we are wrong. We have failed to show her love the way she understands it, the way she believes is right. And so, she betrayed us. She wrote to her teacher in an online assignment that she was being tortured. That was how she saw it. I suspect her regular teacher, who had gotten to know Sam, would have realized what had happened. But she was on maternity leave, and Sam had a new teacher. So, of course, we got a call from the school's social worker. In the end, it all worked out, but we were all caught up in what was right and wrong, and failed to understand the feelings of love and being unloved that were happening right in our midst. Like when a parent shouts at a child who is about to touch a hot stove. We sometimes don't recognize love, especially when it doesn't look like a Hallmark card or a sappy rom-com. But Jesus doesn't miss a beat. It's not about right and wrong. To Jesus or to God, it's about love, relationship, and community. When we make it about right and wrong, the best way or a bad way, we miss out on the good news of the gospel. God's grace is love and forgiveness, not so that we have another chance to get it right, but because love itself is the message and the point, the purpose of it all. And take a moment to look around you. How many people might be expressing love that goes unrecognized? How many people are making sacrifices for you or for others, but because they don't say love, no one notices? Like the old saying about chores, no one notices until they go undone. How much love is being expressed in our world, all around us, that will go unnoticed until it's no longer there. Amen.